The first briefing today is related to data centers. And on May 15, 2026, Mayor Watson, you asked staff through the message board to provide recommendations on managing large load data centers in Austin. On August 19th, the city staff distributed a memorandum regarding staff's recommendations as a response to the message board post. Today, Joi Harden, Interim Assistant Director with Austin Planning, Stuart Reilly, General Manager with Austin Energy, and Shay Roalson, Director of Austin Water, will give a presentation regarding those recommendations in anticipation of item 61 on August 27th City Council agenda. I'll now turn it over to Ms. Harden to begin the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Manager. Oh, we do need to do that. Before Ms. Harden speaks, let's call the speakers. We have a few speakers that are signed up to speak. Thank you for reminding me.
Mayor, we have for item B1, Trey Salinas, Stacy Schmidt, Craig Nazer, Philip Fitzgerald, Dr. Gabriela Cronus. Please make your way to the front. State your name for the record.
Mr. Salinas, you have the floor.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council, and City Manager. I'm Trey Salinas here on behalf of CCARE, which is the Coalition for Clean, Affordable, and Reliable Energy. We're a coalition of small, medium, large, and commercial industrial customers for Austin Energy and Austin Water. I want to thank you for your time this morning, and we want to thank the Mayor for his leadership on this issue. I want to let you know that we agree there needs to be regulation that provides clarity and certainty around land use definitions. We want to remain a high-tech city, but we need to do it in a way that respects our resources and allows for community input. We encourage regulations that allow for more normal, smaller type, responsibly built data centers, like the ones we've had inside the city of Austin for the last 10 to 20 years now. These are the smaller centers that our local technology providers and city departments depend on. CCARE is here as a resource to the City Council as you work through these rule changes today, tomorrow, and Thursday. If you are interested in seeing what we are seeing with regards to data centers inside your city and what we're seeing right outside the city limit lines, we're here to share that with you. Again, we are here as a resource and applaud your efforts today. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schmidt.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Stacy Schmidt, and I am with Opportunity Austin. As Trey said, I commend you all for having this discussion today and the importance that it is to our city. Data centers are nuanced and very complex issues that communities across the state and country are working through in real time. Not every project is right for every community. It's not simply whether to support or oppose data centers broadly, it's whether that project makes sense for that community based on its location, its resource needs, its benefits, and its commitments to the people in that community. This goes back to your work back in April with the resolution for an economic development framework. As it stated, Austin will be strategic on its industries and businesses who seek to relocate in Austin. Simply put, we want companies that fit with Austin values and will help balance the tax base. Austin has real strengths on these companies and industries who want to locate here. But as Trey mentioned, there are many companies who have on-premise data centers that support the work that they do right now and have been for many years. The state is working through their framework. The governor has identified guidelines and has called for an audit. So I commend you all for taking this measured and responsible approach while the state develops their larger framework. We look forward to working with you and the staff to develop guidelines for our city when it comes to digital infrastructure projects. I'll also caution to keep in mind those companies and businesses that have those data centers that support their work right now that they can continue to be successful for many years. We don't want to cause unintended consequences. Austin can continue to welcome responsible infrastructure investment while protecting the resources and the quality of life that we have.
Thank you. Mr. Nazer, your name was called. You weren't in the room. Would you like to speak?
Yes, hello, Craig Nazer, Sierra Club. This whole data center thing is a huge environmental issue, as you know, because of the amount of resources it uses, and particularly electricity, water, light, and sound. Those can all be considerable problems when data centers move into a neighborhood or even sitting out in the middle of nowhere. Now, it's one of the interesting things to keep in mind, though, is this is a rapidly changing technology. And the way they train, there are three kinds of data centers, basically. There's the kind we use for the internet, the smaller kind that we have all distributed all around Austin right now. We have AI, which is huge, usually very huge centers working on, the new ideas about artificial intelligence. And then we have crypto. And I would say that China has outlawed crypto. So crypto has moved to America. And I think, it's hard, to say something can be here or can't based on what it is, but we need to look at that and make those kinds of choices if we want crypto centers all over Austin. So keeping that in mind, there is another thing, is this a rapidly moving technology. AI is getting more efficient. There's good and bad things to AI. That's kind of like out of the scope of a 2-minute conversation, but there are good and bad things about it. But the thing to know is this: the human brain uses 20 watts of electricity. That's like an LED. The equivalent amount of computation in a computer uses about 20 million watts. That has got to get more efficient. It's going to get more efficient, meaning these big data centers are going to change rapidly.
Thank you, Mr. Nazer. Thank you. I think he just looked at us and said, we're not a data center, even combined as a council. Yeah. Thank you, sir. All right. The manager.
We do have remaining speakers, Mayor.
We have more?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Continuing for item B1, we have Brad Massengill, Bobby Levinsky, Kaiba White, Camille Cook. And all speakers for this item have been called.
Thank you very much. So because of the public comment, I want to, if indulge me a second, because I think this council has already revealed how important it sees this item. And that's why it's taking the kind of care and making the kinds of statements it's made that are pretty clear on what we're hoping to see. As the manager pointed out, in May, we started this process by the message board post, and I've been very pleased with the way the council has worked to kind of coalesce around things on the message board. But the idea was that we would propose a framework for preventing and regulating data centers in Austin, utilizing all of the, and I want to say that again, utilizing all of the available tools that we have as a municipality to protect our residents and our natural resources. And I believe I can speak for this council based upon what I've seen council members say when I say that we all want to make sure we end up with a framework that creates legal, durable, and enforceable rules that protect quality of life issues. And those, as have been pointed out this morning, include light, noise, heat, land, energy use, water use, and any other things that we are in a position as a municipality to safeguard. I also, and I think, again, the council has indicated this as well, individual council members, we want to be in a situation where we think about what we're doing in a thorough way so that we don't, by doing something, don't create any loopholes for bad actors in the way we go about this. And that's one of the reasons that I posted on the message board, I can't remember now, but a few days ago, and there's been some follow-up on that, for a freeze, and again, I've been pleased to see council member support on that, a freeze on the approval of any application to any city department for the purpose of placing a data center in the city limits or the ETJ or in our service areas of our utilities until we have a completed policy that's been adopted by the council. In fact, on Thursday, when we take up the resolution, I'm working on an addition to that gives direction on that agenda item that calls for such a freeze, but make sure that we do it in a way that is legal, durable, and enforceable, as I've indicated. None of us, and I want to say this clearly, I think the council has been very clear about how it feels about this. None of us want to have anybody try to play the system in a way where we're not able to protect our citizens. And that is the goal of our thoughtful, appropriate process, and it starts with this, started before, but part of what we're doing today is having this work session that I know we all look forward to. So, Ms. Harden, we've been waiting breathlessly for you to come forward. Thank you all. The manager's already said this, but I want to say on behalf of the council, and I think, again, I think I can speak for the entire council, we appreciate the level of work that your departments are going into to make sure that we do this in a way that's protective of our citizens. So thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Joi Harden, Interim Assistant Director with Austin Planning.
I'm Stuart Reilly, Austin Energy General Manager.
Good morning, Shay Roalson, Austin Water Director.
And we will be briefing you today on data centers. We're here today to discuss the emergence of high-impact data center development around the Austin region and highlight some of the areas for consideration. As the city manager outlined, the mayor introduced this discussion about data centers with a post on the council message board. And as you may know, staff have provided a memo in response to the mayor's post. And for those who have not seen the memo, you may find in the backup for this Thursday's council agenda, the resolution is item number 61. The discussions we'll have today are meant to build upon the research and recommendations presented in the memo and chart a path forward. And again, as I mentioned, there will be a resolution on this week's council agenda for your consideration that, if supported, will initiate code amendments. It is important to note that the resolution for council consideration only initiates the creation of definitions and any associated code amendments, but does not make any changes to the code at this time. This is only step one in the process. So again, the purpose of the resolution outlines areas to address and begins this work. Next slide. As we begin to discuss how the city should address data centers, it's important to understand where we are today. Our current regulations do not address larger data centers. Small, low-impact data centers have been classified as communications services under the City of Austin's Land Development Code. For the purpose of this presentation and the memo, we're referring to these small data centers as traditional data centers. These small data centers are currently permitted in limited office LO zoning and less restrictive zoning district classifications. The City of Austin's Land Development Code, of course, was written long before the rise of cloud computing, large-scale data processing, and AI. These processes have resulted in large load, hyperscale, and other higher impact data centers which do not fall under any of the city's existing land use classifications. The operating characteristics of these larger data centers raise several serious concerns, including the scale and building of their compatibility with surrounding uses and structures, continuous noise, impacts from light and heat, effects of backup generators, and the potential for significant use of energy and water. Again, as mentioned, there is no land use category that addresses larger data centers, so there is no current category to track or regulate these facilities. As I said before, under today's Land Development Code, traditional data centers are assigned the communications services land use. Generally, this means that lower impact data centers are permitted in limited office or LO and less restrictive zoning districts. Currently, larger co-location facilities might be located in limited industrial or LI zoning districts. As I mentioned this before, but I will just state again that because the Land Development Code does not include a land use definition that is specific to data centers, it is challenging for staff to reliably track data centers through existing zoning and permitting records. No. Okay, with that, Austin Energy currently serves 10 data centers. These facilities, for the most part, are 20 megawatts and under. At this time, Austin Energy is not aware of any interconnection requests for a hyperscale data center. Likewise, Austin Water serves no data centers that meet the definition of a large volume water customer. The total data center water use is less than 0.3% total citywide. However, planning staff are receiving inquiries suggesting that higher impact data centers may be under consideration for development within the city limits. And as you know, federal and state policies around data centers are rapidly evolving, so this discussion is timely. Next slide. As the technology industry evolves, data centers are getting much larger in size and capacity. The largest data centers often require campuses exceeding 1,000 acres, including extensive cooling systems, on-site utility infrastructure, backup power generation, and expansive equipment yards. Of course, not all data centers have the same impact. Each facility has different characteristics, capacity, physical size, and operational features. You'll see on this slide the different types of data centers. As we have discussed, what we have now falls within the traditional data center category. And as the slide notes, the traditional data centers are much smaller in terms of building size, acreage, and they use much less water and energy when compared to hyperscale data centers. On this slide, you'll see an example of each of these classifications. As you can see, in addition to having different levels of energy use, they can also look different on the ground. The majority of facilities in Austin are edge, traditional, or smaller coalition types, and we've highlighted the three on this slide for you to see. As the city contemplates the creation of data center regulations, several key land use impacts must be considered. For instance, data centers are often in large, visually unappealing industrial buildings with rooftop mechanical equipment, exterior lighting, and sprawling equipment and loading areas. Some existing data centers around the country produce constant noise. Some data centers generate a great deal of heat and require cooling infrastructure. Facilities may include significant freight access and loading operations, and the consumption of power and water by data centers can be disproportionately high. So, Austin's current code should be amended to address any regulatory gaps. Today, the code does not define higher impact data centers as a separate land use, differentiate traditional from hyperscale facilities, establish siting regulations, require performance standards, provide a mechanism for tracking development, or fully address compatibility impacts. The existing regulations do not match or account for the scale and operational characteristics of the emerging higher impact facilities. Again, we do not have defined land uses specifically for higher impact data centers. Code does not specify whether or where higher impact data centers are permitted, conditional, or prohibited. And lastly, our current regulations do not mitigate for potential impacts of these facilities. Across Texas, some municipalities have begun to address data centers in varying ways. Several cities, such as Frisco and Hutto, require proposed data centers to go through a conditional or specific use process and allow them only in particular zoning districts. Fort Worth is considering building setbacks and other site development standards ranging from landscaping and screening requirements to performance-based noise requirements. Irving has defined data centers as either principal or accessory uses based on square footage and allow principal uses as conditional uses subject to compatibility and site development regulations. And San Marcos City Council recently prohibited hyperscale data centers in all zoning districts. Outside of Texas, some jurisdictions have created regulations that categorize data center based on size and energy demand, and that require special use permits and performance standards and restrict location and noise. In Phoenix, Arizona, for example, a preliminary site plan approval is withheld until a utility provider can affirm the data center's capacity and commit to service the proposed facility. General Manager.
Thank you. Just as some background on Austin Energy around this issue, typically when a new customer comes to Austin Energy, we do not know what that customer intends on doing with the electricity. They're following all regulations in terms of land development code. They submit their electric service planning documentation to Austin Energy, and we engineer the most effective and reliable means of serving that new customer. In doing so, Austin Energy has a legal obligation under the Texas Utilities Code to serve all customers in our certificated service area. New customer connections go through engineering studies to ensure there are no reliability impacts to the electric grid or to other customers. We do this in a couple ways. First, we do an annual planning study that looks at our system as a whole, and we also do additional studies as needed per customer. If a large customer comes along, that study is paid for by that customer. If a customer is 75 megawatts or larger, they're considered a large load under the state definition. That 75 megawatts or greater large load must go through the ERCOT planning process. That will look at whether there is enough transmission capacity and other reliability implications to meet every reliability contingency. Typically, that will require transmission upgrades, and those, if there are transmission upgrades that are necessary, those can take multiple years to complete. We do not, as mentioned earlier, we do not have any in Austin Energy's service area that fit that category. If a new customer is less than 75 megawatts, it doesn't have to go through the ERCOT planning process, but it's up to each utility to study the reliability and engineering implications of that customer. And as I mentioned before, we do so, and that customer pays for that engineering study. If we find through that study that there is additional infrastructure that's required to serve that customer, the customer must pay 100% of the cost of that infrastructure required to serve them. And this protects our existing customers and ratepayers from having their rates subsidize this new development. In addition, if a new customer comes in over 20 megawatts, Austin Energy is requiring them to agree to curtailing at least 50% of their energy usage in an ERCOT emergency or in a localized reliability event. And of course, ERCOT could always call for more curtailment than that. This is just us working with the customers to make sure that they can support reliability before we get into the worst types of ERCOT grid impacts. So many utilities that are looking at this issue are struggling with how to ensure that the costs are covered. At Austin Energy, we have a process in place to ensure that that is already taking place and their infrastructure costs are paid upfront and not subsidized by other customers. And I will turn it over to Shay.
Similar to Austin Energy, Austin Water has a lot of policies in place to protect our existing customers. Nearly all of Austin Water's service area is either in this full-purpose city jurisdiction or covered by a certificate of convenience and necessity, which is a state obligation to provide continuous service by Austin Water to that area. Similar to Austin Energy, new development funds and builds the infrastructure required to serve their site. We do planning for our own infrastructure development, and then when a new development comes in, they file a service extension request, and we look at what's required to serve their development, and they are responsible for those costs to extend the system to serve their development. About 2 years ago, the city implemented the Go Purple program, which requires development. The requirements vary based on development size, but it requires developments to do on-site water reuse, which is like rainwater capture or condensate capture, and reuse that water on site, as well as connect to the centralized reclaim system where they can, so that they can use non-potable water for non-potable needs. We also have a cooling tower efficiency program that requires all cooling towers in our system to be registered with us and to undergo inspections. and new cooling towers are required to use at least 10% reclaimed water or non-potable water for those systems. And we also, new customers, once they get into the site plan permitting process, they submit a water benchmarking application through the city's development process that is reviewed with our staff, that looks at what the opportunities are for that development to use water efficiently, what kind of water needs they have, and how they can serve those water needs most efficiently. And then on the wastewater side, we have an existing pretreatment program for industrial customers that protects Austin Water's wastewater system, and that includes inspections and monitoring and sampling to confirm that customers are meeting the requirements of their individual permits based on what their use at their site. And so these, taken together, these processes and policies protect Austin Water's existing system, as well as ensure that our new customers are being efficient with their water use and protective of the wastewater system.
So moving forward, staff recommends a comprehensive, coordinated approach to address the land use, operational, and utility impacts of higher intensity data centers. A successful strategy would address all of these areas and would also develop a review and enforcement process. Staff recommends that the City of Austin not provide incentives to data centers and that the city require that any data center meet resource efficiency standards. As it relates to land use, staff recommends that the City Council initiates amendments to the Land Development Code. New land use classifications should be defined for data centers. Additionally, a new zoning district specific to data centers should be considered. Any site development regulations for data centers should include increased compatibility standards, setbacks, and both landscaping and screening requirements. Performance standards should include noise limits and mitigation, operational boundaries for generators, and strategies for efficiency and sustainability, and the process for monitoring and ensuring compliance. Next slide. Okay, yeah. These are just some areas where standards could be created: compatibility and siting, lighting, site design and screening, noise mitigation and monitoring, generator operations, and cooling infrastructure strategies. Again, this slide mentions just some of the areas for consideration.
And in terms of Austin Energy, I mentioned earlier that we have an obligation under state law to serve all customers. We can't withhold utility service as a means of regulating land uses. And for that reason, we support adoption of land use and zoning categories for large computational loads, because this can be accomplished prior to coming to Austin Energy for an electric service connection. Essentially, this would ensure that land and resources are being used according to our community's wishes based on land use authority, rather than doing so by violating Austin Energy's obligation to serve. So we're very much in support of updating the planning definitions in a way that regulates land use and better accounts for the changing data center landscape.
Similarly, adopting land use and zoning categories will assist with water supply planning for overall planning for the future of Austin Water Service Area, and accounting for data center water use so that we can report on that water use. We also recommend requiring new higher impact data centers to demonstrate that they are using best available technology, water efficient measures that reduce their potable water use.
So in conclusion, staff are approaching this issue with an interdepartmental collaborative approach that draws on expertise from across the city. Moving forward, staff will continue to collaborate with partner departments, along with industry, community stakeholders, and members of the public. Again, if the resolution on your Thursday agenda is supported, staff will draft the package of proposed code amendments, and those amendments will move through the boards and commissions review and recommendation process before being placed on a city council agenda for consideration and action. We are hoping to bring back the proposed code amendments by spring of 2027. I know I said this a few times previously, but just as a final reminder, the resolution for council consideration only initiates the creation of definitions and any associated code amendments, but does not make any changes to the code at this time. This is only step one in the process. Before we close, I want to note that staff is aware of the significance of this endeavor, as well as the extraordinary level of public interest surrounding data center industry. We are committed to developing recommendations that respond to the changing data center landscape and protecting Austin's residents, resources, and quality of life. Thank you for your time, and we're available for questions.
Thanks to all of you. Members, if you want to speak or have questions, please let me know. And Councilmember Siegel, I'll recognize you first.
Well, thank you, Mayor. Good morning, colleagues. And really, Mayor, thank you so much for laying out our intentions as a body and also explaining a bit of the process that we're in right now. And I really want to thank Ms. Harden for being the point person on this important policy endeavor. I know it's a little spicy, a small amount of work, but I appreciate you and all the staff who are supporting this effort. I wanted to ask you a few questions, Ms. Harden, if that's okay.
Of course.
And just kind of want to just discuss this in plain language for the public to understand. Some of us on council have signaled that we would like to ban hyperscale data centers. Could you explain why we can't formally take that step today?
Yes, a council member and council members. Before any action can be taken, a land use classification definitions has to be created. We don't have this in our code. So Thursday's action, if you support that, that would be the first step. And then staff would look at creating definitions and the like, bring that back to y'all for consideration, and then any action as where they're located could occur at that time.
Thank you. And I've also heard a concern from the public that the vote Thursday is going to somehow allow new data centers. Would you respond to that concern?
Yes, absolutely. Again, Thursday's vote, if supported, would only initiate code amendments. Nothing changes in the code. It would only begin our work to start the process. And then it would go through the at least codes and ordinances, planning commission, and then back to council. And then that's when an ordinance would be put before the council, the body, and then that's when the decisions would be made. We're hoping to have that back to you by spring of 2027, but that would be the first time the code could change.
Great, thank you. And yeah, thanks for the presentation and also for all the staff who worked on the memo. That was very informative. Could you summarize a little bit, again for us, what data centers we currently have in Austin and what do they look like in terms of size, resource use? Could you summarize that a bit?
So I showed some illustrations in the PowerPoint. However, from zoning, I don't see that, but I've spoken to the general manager, and maybe he can give some more clarity on that.
Yes, and good morning. For Austin Energy, we've done an assessment of the data centers that we have in our service territory. We have 10 that range in size from 1 megawatt to 20 megawatts. We could not really account for those that were smaller. There might be some very small on-site data centers. We have one at our control center. So between a megawatt and 20 megawatts, we currently serve 10 of those today. In terms of what they look like, your typical industrial warehouse type building from the front, that's kind of what we've been dealing with in Austin, or what we've been serving for many years.
Thank you, Jim. And Ms. Harden, it looks like staff is considering conditional use permitting, which might be appropriate, at least from my point of view, for the smaller scale data centers. So let's imagine that when this comes back, a majority of us wants to ban large or hyperscale data centers, but we don't want to give a free pass to the types of data centers we've always had and lived with, and we want to make sure we're putting protections in for those facilities as well. Could you talk us through how these conditional use tools are used?
Yes.
Who approves them, the criteria, et cetera?
Yes, so conditional use permits are handled through our Austin Development Services. department. And so when a conditional use permit comes in, the main difference between conditional and permitted uses is that permitted is allowed by right, conditional use is not allowed by right. So the applicant would submit a site plan. That site plan would go through a thorough review, not just with DSD or not with just Austin Development Services, but all applicable departments. So it's a thorough internal review, and then that site plan would go to the applicable Land Use Commission, where that Land Use Commission could approve, deny, or attribute other, approve with conditions. And then from there, additionally, the aggrieved party, meaning if the applicant received approval, then say the neighborhood was in opposition, the neighborhood could appeal to council. Or if the applicant was denied, that applicant could appeal to council.
Great, thank you. And so just to try to sum up a bit, before council can limit data centers, first we need to define them in the code. Is that right?
Absolutely, correct.
And then under state zoning law, we can't ban something before we go through the code development process, which is being initiated in item 61?
I would say yes. I don't want to speak to the state law, but I would say that before we can make any changes, we have to initiate the zoning, and Thursday that would begin that initiation.
Thank you, Ms. Harden. And briefly, colleagues, you've been handed a motion sheet that my office has put together after meeting with staff. And the goal is, like we've all said, not to jump ahead of the process that staff have laid out and that I understand is required under the law before we can start limiting and prohibiting certain types of data centers. But what I was told was that in terms of the resolution we're voting on Thursday, if there are categories of exploration that aren't covered in the staff backup, we should add those now. So just to summarize, in that spirit, this motion would present a few additions. First, in terms of areas of impact of data centers and how we should consider mitigation, it's adding consideration of landscape requirements around data centers, impervious cover limitations, impact of floodplains, and also heat mitigation. A second addition is to develop standards when a data center is located on the same site as a power generation facility. Third, to develop an enforcement program regarding any data centers and city regulations. And then the last piece is something we've heard concern about from community groups, to make sure there aren't any loopholes related to perhaps multiple smaller data centers located in the same area. And also the problem that's occurred in other communities where you start out with a small data center that maybe doesn't fall under real critical review, but then can expand on the same property. So happy to discuss these, but want to offer these with the hope they're helpful and strengthen our overall effort. And then finally, just to make clear, as several of my colleagues shared in a message board post, I just want to share my intention that once we get back these regulations from staff, I think council should decide to ban the so-called hyperscale data centers from our city. I'm not talking about the server in the back room of a bank or some of the smaller data centers at Austin Energy or hospitals or universities that we've had without issue for a long time in Austin, but these hyperscale data centers are not compatible with our quality of life, and we should not allow them here. And so I want to reassure the public that our intention is not to open the door to any of these kinds of facilities because we don't want them in Austin. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember. And along those lines, I want to reiterate that when you asked the specific question of Ms. Harden, you asked the question about whether Thursday's vote would allow, some people worry that it would allow data centers. Her answer, the way you asked the question was you said, would you answer this question? And she said, yes, absolutely. And she did not say, yes, absolutely, the resolution is going to allow data centers. But really what I want to also, I say that kind of as a joke, but what I want to say is the serious part of it is that the purpose of this whole process and what is going to happen on Thursday is the council wants to provide and assure protections. So it is not something that we're voting on that will allow data centers. It is, in fact, to assure we're going through the process to let the protections, as Councilmember Siegel has just reiterated, and as I indicated when I set this up for them to speak, is one of the things that I'm working with legal on to make sure that we have the maximum protection we can is that we have a freeze in place on the granting of applications that might create a loophole as people see us actually considering these things. And as soon as I have something, I'll make sure that goes up on the message board and everybody gets to see that as well. So thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Alter, followed by Councilmember Lane.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start with Ms. Harden to touch on, you mentioned that right now data centers are a communications, or they fall into that category because when the code was designed, we never envisioned data centers of this scale. And you talked about them being allowed in LO, limited office, or more, or less restrictive. Could you just talk about, like, what would those less restrictive categories be? Is that like CS, GR?
Those that you just outlined. So LO is limited office, so that's a office category. So you have your office, and then you have your commercial, like you just outlined, your LR, GR, CS, and then you have your industrial. So all of those are less restrictive zoning. So office, commercial, industrial.
Okay. And is there any reason why we would not be able to say, and you touched on, we need to create a data center zone, right? That this is a new problem that requires a new tool. Mm-hmm. Is there any reason why we would be limited to say that data centers can only be in that new zone, not in any of our existing commercial or industrial zones?
That could be an option when the ordinance returns.
And I'm just thinking about how we have done a number of initiating resolutions, right? We tell staff kind of which direction we want you to go, right? We don't say have a resolution to make housing better in Austin, right? We give you some guidelines and chart a path for you, because that's kind of how this process works. So I just want to make sure that pointing in that direction of having these new data center zones, and that be the only mechanism by which a data center could come here, which would require an application, would require a public process at Planning Commission, would require council approval, that be, those protections be put in place. So, all right, just wanted to make sure that was okay. General Manager Reilly, I was curious, when a data center comes here, or even the current data centers, let's just say, do the regulatory charges are based on the 4CP peaks, correct?
Correct.
And do we know exactly when those are going to be, or we just guess based on educated knowledge?
When the 4 coincident peaks will be?
Yes.
No, our team does a lot of work to forecast that and to deploy demand response resources and things like that to lower our demand on those days that could be the 4 coincident peak days. I will say that the team has done an outstanding job this summer and has hit all of those so far, and so we don't know when they will be. We're looking to forecast when those will be.
Sounds like we need to get the team to help us buy the lotto tickets. But aside from that, basically the more usage you have at one of those 4CP, the 4 coincident peaks, the higher our regulatory charge. You talked about if a new data center wanted to come here, we have the authority to say you need to do the full build out in terms of all that infrastructure to get connected. But is it correct to assume that if let's just say you plop down a 50 megawatt data center that's running all the time, that would increase our 4CP and therefore increase our regulatory charge that we all pay for? Or is that right or not?
Yes. I mean, it's true that any incremental new customer increases our demand and could increase our peak demand, and with that, and just so everybody knows kind of some of the background around this, when we're talking about the regulatory charge, that's the item on the customer's electric bill that is an allocation from ERCOT of our proportionate expense of ERCOT transmission grid. So whenever any transmission service provider builds new transmission across ERCOT, those costs are socialized across to all utilities. Our percentage of ERCOT, our percentage of the peak demand on these 4 coincident peak days is about 3.5%. So of all the transmission investments going on across ERCOT, we receive an allocation of that. Our customers end up paying 3.5% of those costs. And so the more we can keep our peak demand low, the less ERCOT will allocate to us. The regulatory charge has been going up quite a lot in recent years as more and more transmission build out has been happening across ERCOT. Some of that is because of renewable resources and is very necessary. And some of it could be because of data centers in other areas or just other large load customers or new loads across the state and the need to get power around. And so any new customer that comes to Austin Energy could increase that peak. Whether the new large customer, in your example, if a new 50 megawatt customer comes to Austin and they increase our peak demand, whether their charge into that payment would be sufficient to offset that to their own proportionate use, I would have to get back to you on, because I don't think there's a one-to-one relationship. And especially as we're deploying more batteries and solar and setting records over, year over year, we're working to kind of keep our demand as low as we can. And there have been many new peak demand days across ERCOT this summer. We have not set a new peak demand here in Austin, and that speaks to all the energy efficiency and demand response we're doing.
And speaking of demand response, are we allowed to require, let's say, a new data center to participate in demand response? Could that be a condition of them receiving service?
What we are requiring of any new customer that's over 20 megawatts is that if in any kind of local reliability event that they are able to curtail. So I would imagine that that's a kind of a different permutation of the same thing, and participating in demand response. So we can definitely look into that and get back more information to you.
Okay. And then from the water side of things, you touched on our obligation to serve, but also the service extension request. Can you just help reconcile for everybody, if we're required to serve somebody, but somebody has a service extension request, why are we not required to approve that service extension request if they're required to receive our service?
So the services extension requests are administratively approved with the exception of properties that are located outside the full purpose city limits, city jurisdiction, and within the drinking water protection zone, which is generally the 3 watersheds that are in the west part of the city. So, and some of those areas are also covered by our Certificate of Convenience and Necessity, CCN, with the state. Areas that are not in the drinking water protection zone are considered to be in the desired development zone, and the majority of the desired development zone that we serve is in our CCN, and so we have an obligation to serve. So when a service extension request comes in, that is really us developing a service plan, and we do that regardless of their land use, where they are in our service area. So anyone who comes in that needs new service from us, we evaluate what infrastructure needs to be constructed to serve that property, and we provide them a service plan. And that's a commitment to serve if that's what they build. A lot of those service extension requests come in very early in the development process, and it provides the developers a little bit more cost certainty about the utility costs that they may bear to extend service to their development.
So bottom line, though, if someone is within the CCN and they apply for a service extension request, do we have the authority to say no, or do we just have the authority to set conditions but ultimately have to say yes?
So If the city council were to decide not to serve a property that is within our CCN, we would have to seek to release that property from our CCN with the Public Utility Commission of Texas, and they would have the authority to say yes or no.
Got it.
And they could require us to serve within our CCN, prevent us from releasing it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Lane, and then Councilmember Duchin.
Thank you. I want to thank my colleagues for initiating this conversation and staff for your thorough work in response. I also want to sign on to the call for prohibiting hyperscale data centers within city limits. Economic development is important, but it can't come at the sacrifice of our water, energy, air, and neighborhoods. Clear and predictable rules also serve everyone, building public trust and confidence while ensuring that businesses and anyone weighing a project in Austin knows the rules of the road going in. I also hope that we bring our regional partners into the conversation as these facilities draw in resources we share with the communities around us. So with that intro, I have a couple of questions. First, on slide 6, the wholesale tier is listed as 20 to 100 megawatts and hyperscale at 75 plus. So there's a lot of overlap between these categories at the top end. And a large wholesale facility can match a smaller hyperscale facility in load, massing, and water demand. When the recommendation on slide 16 refers to the highest impact data centers, can staff clarify whether that designation is intended to capture wholesale as well as hyperscale?
Yes, it would capture both.
Great, thank you. So I definitely think that there's a discussion to be had about extending the prohibition to the wholesale data center type, and clarity about our policy preferences in that area could be helpful. And so I just want to open up that aspect of the conversation as well to my colleagues. And then the other question I have is just trying to understand the regional piece. We're regulating land use within our boundaries, but the grid is ERCOT-wide, our water sources are shared. If Austin adopts prohibitions and our neighbors don't, there will still be pressure on those shared resources. Is there a plan to bring surrounding jurisdictions into the conversation to see whether they'd consider aligned standards or how to work on other aspects of this?
I mean, I believe as we look to develop recommendations to bring back to this body, we are definitely going to be speaking to our partners surrounding, we're bringing in so many people. So yes, that is a consideration, and we definitely look to be speaking with them as well, yes.
Great. I think it's important, so appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
And council member, if I could just chime in about the relationship to ERCOT and surrounding areas. On that slide that you pointed out, we did snap the line at 75 and above for hyperscale. I think the data center industry might disagree that 75 is hyperscale, but I think that number is getting larger and larger all the time as to what's considered normal and what's considered hyperscale. The 75 megawatt and above threshold does align with the ERCOT threshold for going through the full ERCOT planning process and making sure that can be interconnected and still meet all reliability contingencies. And the ERCOT process has gone through several different permutations, but now those who are 75 megawatts or above are in the batch zero process with ERCOT. That is going to take some time to play out as to who all can be interconnected in that batch zero process. There's also an ERCOT data center audit process that's happening, which is different. And that process could be December, is I think what they're targeting for the audit. I think we'll know the full batch zero implications maybe in April. But again, as I mentioned before, we don't have anybody in that batch zero. So from Austin Energy's perspective, it would be beyond when batch zero happens that any potential 75 megawatt or above, and that's not, that study and those interconnections aren't coming anytime soon.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Duchin.
Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to staff for their work on this and the presentation. I'm going to jump in with some questions, then if I've got time, make a couple of comments. First, I want to start with Ms. Harden. What roadblocks or difficulties should the council be aware of as we're rewriting the ordinances to make specifically the non-co-located data centers, right, the ones that we're more concerned about, a conditional use for some of the zoning categories like IP, LI, MI, R&D, commercial, and then prohibit it elsewhere? Like, would this not be an easier method than creating a new zoning category? Can you walk me through the logic that you guys chose for this approach?
I mean, I think we're still thinking through what is going to be the best approach. So I think that making sure we lay everything out, all considerations, so the council knows what we're looking at. But I don't think that that is a poor approach that you laid out, and I don't think that's one that we're not considering. We are just considering, we've done research, we're looking at best practices, and we're going to talk to many people and go from there. So I wouldn't say we're not considering that approach, but we're looking at many different approaches.
Okay, got it. So that decision hasn't been made. We're just really defining things as a first step and then going to make those decisions down the line.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. I've got some questions for GM Reilly. So first of all, are you familiar with, I would assume you would be, the commercial rate categories that are listed on the AE website, things that are like in the commercial industrial customer categories?
Yes.
So
generally, the details, I'd have to have it in front of me but yeah.
Okay, well, I pulled them up, and there are things like primary voltage 3 and 4, and I'm curious if you have a sense of how many commercial and industrial primary voltage 3 and 4, which are just basically greater than 20 megawatt customers, do we have at this time?
Probably just a handful, half a dozen or so over that size. 10, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay, so somewhere between like the 20 megawatt limit that we've got for the data centers that are here in Austin, there are 5 or 10 larger customers
that might be above that threshold.
Okay,
but I'd have to look to be sure, but not many.
And just generally speaking, the price that we charge for those customers, how does that compare to residential customers, like in a kilowatt hour rate? Can you speak to any of that?
Well, utility rates are set based on costs, and costs are different based on customer category. So if you're served at a higher voltage, let's say you're a transmission or your primary service customer, you don't take service at the lower distribution levels. There's less infrastructure required. There are fewer line losses. You're using the system more efficiently. And so the cost to serve those customers is lower. But we always try to get them to cost, but the cost of serving a larger customer is lower.
Okay, thank you for helping me understand that. Can you help me understand next what visibility does council have or council members have over the newer commercial industrial customers you might acquire or you might have to extend service to?
In terms of any customer-specific information, I can't disclose publicly. That's that customer's own information. But council members have a right of access so we could meet with you and discuss or share that information, which would be considered confidential customer usage and customer identifiable information. So, but council members would have a right of access.
Okay, but there's no currently like a periodic reporting that exists that says every year, 6 months, here's the updated list of large commercial or industrial customers that you guys would share?
No, we have not done that.
Okay. Last question is, what's your understanding of the limitations for reporting? I know that you just mentioned there are certain things that you're allowed to share and you can't, and then we have to put a different hat on from the way that you characterized it previously to me. So what are you allowed to share about those large customers?
Well, in terms of being able to disclose any customer usage information, I'm not permitted to disclose how large a customer is, what the customer does, what their electric usage or load profile is, any of those electric customer specific details are considered confidential for that customer, and they would consider that to be their own competitive information as well.
But you would be able to share something like, we have 5 new large industrial customers that are over 20 megawatts that you should be aware of.
Yes, if council was seeking, just general information about load growth and customer additions generally, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And Director Raulston, is that pretty much the same for water?
So for water, we have a handful of customers that are considered large volume customers that use more than 85 million gallons of water a year, and that information is available.
Okay, thank you. So I know it seems like I may not be going exactly somewhere with this, but there is a place I'm going, because this is a tough issue right now for this district, because we're dealing with a specific new large customer that it's not entirely clear if they are going to be, what work they're doing out there. And they may wind up, at least there's one report, and I'm getting some details here, but there is some indication that they might be in the largest data center that we have here in Austin by a factor of 2 or 3 times. And we talked with them recently this morning to try and get clarity on that project. And I am able to share that from their perspective, it's a different company. It's a company called Graphcore that's coming there. That'll be their U.S. engineering headquarters. But just to start at the beginning, I think this is a tough issue for a couple of reasons here. One is, like we've talked about, like the staff presentation, there's some nuance here in terms of co-located data centers, in terms of cloud-based AI data centers, in terms of things that we decide we need here to serve our higher ed and our hospitals and other vital industries, and things that we decide aren't necessary. They could be held in a different state or different country because we don't have to have them here. There's not a proximity requirement. And then there's also this instance that we're getting into that I'm talking about, where you've got these sort of businesses that might be in data adjacent spaces that might require some of the compute power of data centers, but not actually be data centers themselves, which creates, I think, a separate challenge for us to think through. And so while I appreciate that we're moving in this direction of prohibiting large data centers or hyperscalers, and I agree with that position wholeheartedly, I think the real challenge is going to be hashing out, where do we draw our line, right? Is it going to be at 70 megawatts, which is just short of what the state considers these large data centers? Is it, and the presentation indicated this morning, and again, that threshold is important to me, because if we're talking at a potential 50 megawatt data center that has already been approved under current zoning, under the commercial allowance that we've got, then that would be certainly a significant change for where we've currently been for the last couple of decades. And so some of y'all are familiar with the 3M campus off 2222. We call it High Point now. It was recently sold again to a company called SoftBank. And we had been told up until very recently the intent was for advanced R&D. And the challenge is there's some stuff that came out, their own information apparently that put out that was inaccurate, suggesting it was a single tenant wholesale data center with a 50 megawatt critical IT load, 3 data center halls, office space, bench lab, et cetera. We're told that that was a mistake on their part. And but it does raise a concern, and this is what I want to get to, which is it possible, rather than sort of being surprised, like they were surprised when we indicated they'd be one of the largest AE customers, and we were certainly surprised by the confusion around this item or this particular project. I am interested in seeing if you guys would be okay with bringing forward an amendment, or we can bring forward an amendment that does ask for periodic reporting of the large-scale changes, or the changes in large-scale customers for industrial and commercial, so that we can at least be aware of or do some due diligence around projects in the future and not kind of run up to the wire about trying to understand what these projects entail. Is that something you guys would be comfortable with at Austin Energy or Austin Water?
Are you saying prior to being able to engineer service to a customer, you're seeking a summary from Austin?
I'm just seeking like a periodic report every 6 or 12 months, whatever you think the right cadence is, so that as you're extending service through projects, because it may take some time for us to, it sounds like, approve the final version of our data center policy if we're starting with just the definitions on Thursday. I'm asking if it's possible to get updates on large-scale customer changes that you're extending service to, so that we're able to do due diligence on our end and not be caught unawares of projects that might have implications in the data center space or in other spaces that we might need to be aware of.
Councilmember, may I suggest that perhaps a reporting of power use or water use by customer class? So that way we could avoid individual customer data, but you could see the trends.
Yeah, I think anything that would just give us some clues that we might need to do some additional research or investigation around some changes that you all are anticipating is what I'm looking for.
So, Councilmember, what I would suggest is, look, the purpose of what we're doing here is so that we can get clarity, we can have a thoughtful approach to it, and by the way, added to that, a complete approach to it. And that's, I think that's a universal desire here. We have limitations on what can happen, and so I think letting them come back, you're very clear on what it is that you're after, and I think we're all interested in that. We want to know so that we can prepare and plan, and we make sure we're not finding loopholes or problems in the clear, thoughtful, and complete approach. So please come back with something on that. That'd be a helpful part of all of this.
Great.
Otherwise, we're going to have loopholes. Otherwise, we're going to have gaps, and we're trying to do this we're trying to do it in a very thoughtful, appropriate, legal way.
Thank you, Mayor. That's what I was getting at. And yeah, just to avoid a place where I'm having to investigate the morning of work session on what a potential project entails, and give us some more runway on some of these developments is what I'm looking for.
Good deal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. All right, council members, I think we're through all the speakers and all the questions. Very good presentation. We're very appreciative of the work, and as you can see, I think my opening comments ring true here at the end too. We have what it appears to be is a pretty united council about wanting to do this the right way, but be protective of the interest of our citizens and quality of life and water and energy and all of those aspects. So thank you for the work that's being done on it, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday, if not before.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll also just say that there was a message board post and a discussion about there being some press availability after the meeting, after the work session. However, my count was there were 5 people that were already on that message board post, and while it invited other members to be a part of that, that would probably be a violation of the Open Meetings Act. And so if everybody wants to have a press conference, go ahead and do that, but there may be people not at the press conference, and I don't want anything read by any member of the public or any part of the media that people aren't interested if they're not at the press conference.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I would like our city attorney to speak to it, because it's my understanding that when we post publicly that there's a quorum of council members who are interested, and we make it known that we're having press availability, that other members of the council are able to attend said press conference.
It wasn't posted as a meeting.
Right. No, we posted it on the message board showing public intent.
No, that doesn't work.
So in the years past, how did we navigate this? Because I remember many years in which we've had press conferences and we've invited the media to be there, and the full council was able to attend should they choose to. And I don't know how many times we reached more than 5 council members actually attending.
We would hope that you didn't.
you're saying for us to have 6 council members speaking on a topic with the media, we would have to post formal notice
Yes,
in advance?
yes.
Well, that is unfortunate, but, Councilmember Lane, you indicated interest in joining our press conference, and we appreciate your support. Certainly knowing how important this topic is to us as a dais and to our community, now knowing that we will need to formally post every time we would like, or we know that more than 5 have an interest in speaking on a topic, we'll be sure to formally post a meeting notice. And can you remind us the requirements of that? Is it 72 hours?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. But that's why I wanted to call it, if somebody's not there, it should not be read as a lack of interest or lack of desire to do right by the citizens with regard to this very, very important item. So I just wanted to be clear on that. That'll take us to item B2, and Manager, I'll recognize you.
Thank you, Mayor.